Hi, thank you for tuning into this channel. My plan for this channel is to cover on global economics and politics as well as current cultural issues. So if you want to see more of this, kindly share, like, and subscribe. Okay, for today's video, we are going to talk about the US trade deficit and what the upcoming President Donald Trump will do to solve this issue. Will Trump's solution be good or bad? Before I start, I just want to share with you that this is all just an opinion. You are welcome to leave your comments. Let's exchange opinions and ideas. So let's start our video. Over the past few years, we have seen that every presidential candidate running for president talk a lot about trade deficits. Out of all countries, China seems to be the biggest victim of this trade deficit backlash. Is it justified? Well, stay tuned and we are going to do analysis as well as giving our opinion on the US trade deficit. Kindly take note that this is only our opinion and we welcome your opinion as well as whether you agree or disagree with us. And we do appreciate your feedback. We also would appreciate your support. So kindly press the like button, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. It will help this. So let us start by taking a look at the US trade balance. Here is a list of the US largest trading partners for 2021. According to this chart, the US largest trading partners is Canada at $665.6 billion, Mexico at $661.2 billion, China at $665.4 billion, Japan at $209.5 billion, Germany at $200.5 billion, and so on. As we can see from the chart above, the US runs a large trade deficit with its 20 largest trading partners. The largest of these trade deficits is with China at $353.5 billion. During Trump's 2016 presidential run, Trump was very unhappy with the large trade deficit the US has with China. As a result of this, Trump decided to engage on a tariff war with China, hiking tariff on goods such as steel, automobiles, solar panels, washing machines, and many more. Donald Trump first mentioned tariffs back in the 80s during the Japanese economic miracle. Trump argues that the US imposing tariff would reduce the trade deficit and would encourage local manufacturers to produce goods in the US. During his 2016 presidential election, Trump's major selling point was the large US trade deficit, particularly with China. Trump stated that currency manipulation by China makes American companies uncompetitive. Later on during Trump's presidency, he would engage in trade war with China, hiking tariff on goods such as steel, automobiles, solar panels, washing machine, and many more. According to the US Trade Representative Robert E. Lighthizer, China maintains a policy of forced technology transfer along with practicing state capitalism, including buying US technology companies and using cyber theft to gain technology. Due to this, starting from 2018, the Trump administration started to take great measures to prevent Chinese state-owned companies from buying US tech companies and tries to stop American companies from handling key technologies to the Chinese state-owned companies. China responds by saying that the US are making business allegations. China denies any practices of forced technology transfer for foreign companies investing in China. The Chinese argument argue that the US trade war's main goal was to slow down China's economic growth and warns that there will be negative impact on the global economy if the war continues. After the US increased tariff on Chinese goods, the Chinese government retaliates by increasing tariff to up to 25% on American goods such as agricultural products, automobiles, aerospace, and so on. When Joe Biden took office in 2021, hopes of lifting of tariff arise leading to China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi demanding Biden to lift the multiple restrictions imposed by Trump previously. However, Biden has clearly indicated that he is in no rush to lift this restriction. In fact, Biden would end up banning exports of semiconductors to China. This move is deemed strategic to stifle growth in China because China, being the world manufacturer, needed these chips in order to continue their export ambitions. Biden will later double tariff on solar cells from China and triple tariff on electric vehicle batteries imported from China. The US also raised tariffs on imports of Chinese steel, aluminum, and medical equipment. China a lot. So, is higher tariff effective at shrinking the US trade deficit and bringing back jobs to the US? Well, that's debatable as per these charts. According to the United Nations Comtrade database on international trade, even though the trade war started in 2018, the trade wars failed to contain the deficit from becoming larger in 2018. Come 2019, though, the trade deficit with China did shrink significantly. It shrinks even further in 2020, largely due to COVID lockdown, and almost all business activities in China comes to a halt. In 2022, the large trade deficit grew again and was almost as large as trade deficit back in 2018 before significantly dropped in 2023. What we can see from here clearly is that trade deficit growth did slow down over this period, while deficit grew by $80 billion from $295 billion to $375 billion. Instead, from 2017 to 2022, when the trade war with China started, deficit grew only by $7 billion from $375 billion in 2017 to $382 billion in 2022. It even went further in 2023. So while tariff failed to significantly shrink the deficit, it did slow down the growth of deficit. Now let us have a look at U.S. manufacturing output and manufacturing employment. Upon looking at this chart, the U.S. manufacturing job grew from 12.4 million jobs in 2017 to 12.7 million jobs in 2018, and it grew to 12.8 million jobs in 2019. However, in 2020, due to COVID lockdown, US manufacturing job shrinks to 11.6 million. The US manufacturing job recovered post COVID lockdown and it reached 30 million jobs by 2023. Based on this chart, the US manufacturing output also steadily increased ever since Trump started the trade wars back in 2018. And later on, Biden extended the trade wars with China. Industrial production did increase slightly from 2017 to 2024. However, based on the US industrial production figures and US manufacturing employment figures, it seems pretty clear that whatever gains from manufacturing jobs and industrial outputs are very limited. Let us have a look at this chart. While the US trade deficit with China did slow down and also in some years it did decrease, the US trade deficit with the rest of the world grew larger over the same time period. The trade deficit with the rest of the world did go down by almost 18% in 2023 from 971.12 billion US dollar to 773.4. However, I would argue that is largely due to increased petroleum exports to Europe due to Russian export ban of petroleum products to the EU. What we can conclude from this is that while some companies did bring back manufacturing jobs to the US, most choose to invest to other countries instead. Ever since the trade war started, countries like India, Mexico, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia have received huge inflows of foreign direct investment, particularly from US companies. So instead of companies relocating back to the US and MA, many manufacturing companies instead choose to move operations to other countries that is not under trade restriction from the US. Recently, Trump has threatened to put a 10% tariff increase for most countries that do not match the US tariff rate. If Trump actually follows through with this move, it will be interesting to see whether that will successfully bring the majority of manufacturing jobs back to the US or not. So, is it true that manufacturing outsourcing to China and other low cost countries the reason behind manufacturing job losses in the US? While we do agree that manufacturing outsourcing is partly to blame, we believe that China or other lower cost labor countries are not solely to blame for this. Let's have a look at this chart. As per this chart, we can see that it is true that manufacturing job losses is real. However, job losses has been an ongoing theme even long before the rise of manufacturing outsourcing moved to lower cost countries like China, Mexico, Malaysia, Vietnam, and so on. Job losses in the manufacturing sectors have already started pre 1970s, even before companies started to move their manufacturing operations to low cost countries and mass. While at the same time, we can clearly see from this chart that the number of people with a bachelor degree increased significantly during this period. This indicates that more and more of the US populations are shifting their focus from working in a highly labor intensive manufacturing industry to the service on industry or to a more professional job where the working environment is much better. It is also wrong to solely blame manufacturing job losses on companies outsourcing to other cheap labor countries. Because based on this chart, manufacturing output in the US has been increasing over the past few decades, while manufacturing job losses continues to accelerate. As time goes by, more and more manufacturing jobs in the US have been replaced by robots and automation. So it's absolutely wrong for people to blame it on, manufacturing outsourcing to China and ASEAN and so on. I mean, like, it played a part, of course, but it's not the entire story because the US manufacturing output has been increasing for decades, while manufacturing job losses has been continuing for decades. What this means is that the manufacturing jobs is being replaced by robotics and automation. It's not solely to blame on manufacturing outsourcing. At this point, I don't think anyone is denying that the US have too many business regulations. Some would say that there is too many unnecessary business regulation. A country with too much bureaucracy tends to kill entrepreneurship. According to a study done by MacArthur Center at the George Mason University, using novel data of the extent of US federal regulation for 215 industries and data on firm births and employment from the statistic of US business, the study confirms the hypothesis that regulation inhibits business growth and job creation while protecting larger existing business. For example, firm births, a 10% increase in intensity of regulation leads to a statistically significant zero point 0.5 decrease in overall firm births. There is a statistically significant decrease among births of small firms, but no statistically significant effect on births of large firms, confirming the hypothesis that incumbent firms benefit from regulation because it deters new entrants. Firm death. Regulation had no statistically significant effect on firm death. Regulation drives away new entrants but does not put existing firms out of business. In fact, there is some evidence that firm death may increase with increased regulation as business benefit from less competition. New hires. A 10% increase in regulation is associated with a statistically significant 0.9% decrease in hiring among all firms and a 0.5% decrease specifically among small firms. As of 2016, the Code of Federal Regulation has grown to 175,000 pages. So it's no wonder that small business cite regulatory burdens as one of the biggest challenges. I mean, that figure is just ridiculous to put it bluntly. You can't remain competitive in manufacturing as a country when you have 175,000 pages of business regulations. That's not a good way to do business. This regulation just keep on growing and growing every single year. For example, there was 3168 new final regulation in 2022 and 3527 new final regulations in 2021. On the other hand, while there is not much information as to how many pages of business regulation that some Asian countries like China or Japan or South Korea has, it's however well known that Asian countries are very pro business and that their government actually work together with the private sector to help implement reforms and come up with new policies. According to Daniel Okimoto, who is a professor of political science at Stanford University, he described that government business regulations in Japan are informal, close, cooperative, flexible, reciprocal, non-litigious, and long-term in orientation. It is obvious to me that a large part of the large U.S. trade deficits has more to do with U.S. regulation overburdening manufacturers. So, after analyzing all of this data, in my opinion, higher tariff will not help to shrink its trade deficit by much. Even if it does help, the effect was minimal. It is because most companies would relocate to other countries that provide cheaper alternatives to China. Currently, huge investments have gone to countries like Mexico, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on. The trade wars that were initiated by Trump and later on continued by Biden did not help to shrink the US trade deficit. It helped shrink the trade deficit with China to some extent, but most of these companies would end up going to other low-cost countries. That is why deficit did not shrink significantly as a whole. Trump recently have said that he wants to increase tariff on every single country in the world that doesn't apply the same tariff rate as the US, which will hurt poor and developing countries the most. Well, first of all, I find that as unfair because the only way for poor countries to compete with rich countries is to protect their domestic industries. If poor countries have the same import tax rate as rich countries, then their industries will be decimated in no time. They will forever be dependent on commodities and agriculture. Let us remember that during the 19th century, the US used to be a very protectionist economy themselves. They used to place high tariffs on imported goods coming from Europe and other parts of the world. The protectionist period was the golden age of American industry. America's economic performance surpassed the rest of the world by the greatest margin. It was the era in which the US transformed itself from an agricultural backwater into the greatest economic power in the history of the world. I don't think it's fair to expect poor and developing countries to apply the same tariff rate as the US. There is going to be repercussions from these trade wars. Other countries might retaliate and they might also increase their tariff. This could hurt US exports even more. Tariff wars would also damage American brand competitiveness overseas. Consumers would opt for other products from other countries when prices balloon, and consumers from overseas might end up boycotting US products altogether if trade wars continue for a long extended period of time. This will end up hurting US exports. Regardless of all of this, if hypothetically, let's say the US government did successfully manage to convince the majority of US companies to relocate back all of their manufacturing facilities back to the United States, I don't think local producers will be able to meet US consumer demands. I mean, let's face it, the US is such an overregulated country for business. In my opinion, overregulation is killing US manufacturing competitiveness. I mean, the recent TSMC investment in Arizona proves my point. TSMC Arizona started construction back in June 2021 and has yet to fully finish construction. Meanwhile, TSMC Japan investment, which started 10 months after TSMC Arizona, has already finished construction back in February 2024. The TSMC Arizona plant is expected to be fully completed by mid 2025. You see how slowly things are done in America. So, with the amount of business regulation that America has, I don't think local producer will be able to meet the US consumer demand, which is the largest in the world, um, uh, on time. Have a look at the 2010 Foxconn field business investment in Wisconsin. The original Foxconn plan was to invest in Wisconsin up to $10 billion. However, due to heavy politicking, change of leadership, and no consistent policies, heavy scrutiny from the media, in the end, the investment went kaput. People were vilifying Foxconn, saying that there were threats of eminent domain on farmers when it's simply not true, according to Alan Young, who was a former Foxconn head of project in Wisconsin. The farmers were paid $5,000 per acre, if not more, to sell their land. They were happy to sell their lands, and those who do not want to sell their lands remain there. So, where is the basis of this eminent threat notion? The truth is, I don't think the government is solely to blame behind this failed investment. I think the media played a huge part at destroying this deal as well, and because of them, they created a negative perception on the project. I can go on and give more examples, but I think we can stop here for now. I think that the main problem is business regulation, and I don't think simply raising the tariff would help would help solve issues in America. I mean, it might solve the issue of trade deficit. It might help solve the issue of manufacturing employment. But then again, with the unfriendly business environment that the US has, I doubt that manufacturers will be able to meet consumer demand uh, on time. You know, and what this will lead to is the hyperinflation. I mean, like you might solve some issue like trade deficit and US manufacturing jobs, but you're going to cause other major problems. So I don't think simply raising the tariff rate is going to be a positive impact for the US. So what should America do to shrink trade deficit and bring back American jobs to the US? To me, it is obvious that the best solution is to eliminate as much business regulations as possible. The argument that low cost labor countries are the major reason behind manufacturing job losses in America and how America can no longer compete with Asian countries due to high costs, to me, is a myth. Germany and Japan are not low cost labor countries. Germany, which uses the euro currency, is actually stronger than the US dollar. But Germany has a huge trade surplus with China. They even have large trade surplus with many poor and developing countries. Japan, on the other hand, while their trade balance is negative, their trade deficit is extremely tiny compared to the US. So, what are Germany and Japan doing that the US wasn't doing? Well, both countries are very pro business. They didn't politicize business investment and they have a labor union that is pro business. None of this is present in the US business environment. I have to mention though, when it comes to Germany, a lot of the stuff I mentioned is pre COVID lockdown. Lately, even the government is happy to make businesses suffer. Anyway, I honestly feel that the best way for the US to become competitive in manufacturing again is to cut as many regulations as possible and to get rid of the toxic labor union in the States. They are destroying US manufacturing. This way, you can bring back manufacturing jobs back to the US without having to engage in a global trade war. US exporters would not be hurt by retaliatory tariff measures, and in fact, exports can grow again. America doesn't have to isolate themselves from the world, and America can even gain back the trust that was lost over the past few years. I am not saying that all of Trump's claim is unfounded. I do agree with him when it comes to China. I do think that isn't fair to compete against a country that is no longer poor but still continuing to devalue its currency and using forced labor to remain competitive. In that sense, I do feel that Trump has a point when he attacks China. However, I disagree when he wants to engage in trade wars with every country in the world. And he seems to have this simplistic idea that tariff will solve everything when it won't. I am of the view that deregulation is far more effective at shrinking trade deficit compared to tariff. Anyway, that's all we have for today. If you enjoyed this video, kindly leave your comment, subscribe, and share. We will cover global politics in the future more. Take care.